Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Karen Panetta, and today we're going to talk about how to find a research topic. And again, if you have any questions during the presentation, you're more than welcome to write it into the questions. So there's a small group, and I'm happy to entertain any question you may have. So I've tried to prepare this talk from two flavors. One, that you already have a research advisor, and maybe you have your own ideas you want to pitch, or you have your own ideas you want to pitch, or you have absolutely no clue. So, and then maybe you're in industry and you're part-time and you don't know how to bring that idea to fruition with a professor. So, research, whenever you're going in, you're going to be a master's student or a PhD student. And when we talk about original research, that means that, if you're doing a thesis, that means you have to do something that nobody else has ever done before, at least not in the way somebody else has ever done it before, versus a master's project. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So the first thing is, we want to talk about is, how do I even begin? Where do I begin? Well, if you have a research advisor, one of the easiest, I call it the path of least resistance, is that we all have grants. And just because our students graduate, some professors are mean and they won't let the student graduate until the end of the grant or the work is 100% done. But we know that there's a lot of different things that go on in people's lives, and there's always going to be some overlap. So as people move into new programs, people are moving out. Faculty like to overlap the students in some way if they can, so that there's a smooth transition. So most of the time, one of the easiest ways to get into a new project is to do a continuation of what somebody else has been working on. Now, again, what you add to it has to be very different, but at the same time, it's a great way for you to learn and jump right into a problem to understand what's going on. So that's something that we're going to talk a little bit about. Well, how do I even do that? How do I even find out about it? So if you have a research advisor already, you will have people in the lab or their lab that are working on things. And the first thing is you have to know is that there's a lot of different funded projects. So a professor has sources of funding. It might be multiple projects. It might be one giant grant, for a center or something like that. You should be able to look at what projects are going on. Hopefully there's a group meeting to talk about this. And if not, you can look at the different publications that are coming out of there and see who the current students are in the lab. Hopefully there's a lab somewhere where you can actually go in and know who's in that lab and how they do this. Some professors have postdocs and they work exclusively doing certain things that the professor wants them to do, but there's usually a training type of thing that goes on that they want to try to train you. So for instance, if you're in the bio lab and there's a specific way to run experiments or to use specific equipment, some professors expect in chemical and biological engineering that you maintain the equipment, that you're cleaning the equipment after you use it, or that you know how to, put the supplies away. All those logistical types of things are things that somebody has to teach you. You just can't go in and figure, oh, I'll figure it out. Someone has to teach you that, or you have to have someone mentor you. So that's the first thing to understand is what are the operations that you need to understand to just even work in this lab. And the other thing that's not on this lab, but really is important is, do you need some sort of certification to work in that lab? So right now, if you were to work in my lab, you would need to take what we call they call it CITI training, which is a certification to say you understand good conduct of research, you know how to publish things, you understand what's ethical, you understand what's plagiarism, you understand authorship and proper attribution. And courses now at school are all online. So you do it as a self-paced thing, and schools offer this thing, and you get a little certificate that says, yes, you are certified. And the reason you need that is sometimes to be in a lab, the university requires you be certified. Now, if you're working in a bio lab, you would have to get some sort of certification for that lab. So there's biohazards, there's working with different types of animals, things like that. So you would also have to take that type. So depending on what lab you're working on, the first step you might think about is, well, I first need to get these certifications before I can even venture to look at or even walk in a lab and learn or copy what somebody else is doing. So think about what your research area is and if you need some sort of training to do that and get that out of the way very quickly. Now, can you meet with current students in the groups that you want? And in some schools, they let you roam around for a year and they don't make you specifically pick an advisor. But this is your opportunity to meet with current students who are in the master's or PhD programs, and they'll be in your classes or you'll see them in the labs. And you need to be really forward, with them and say, I saw that you just published this great paper. You're doing research with this professor that I want to work with in this area. Can I come in and see, your lab? Can you show me what you're working on? Can I see an example of something you're simulating? Nobody's going to say no to you. Nobody's going to say, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. Students want to be able to present their things for that. If postdocs might not have time for you because they're supervising so many students, but other master's students really want to engage with you, and other PhD students really want to engage with you as well. If they're teaching assistants while they're trying to do research, they might say, well, I'm really busy, but if I'm in the lab at this time, or we have this group meeting, maybe you can get invited to a professor's group meeting. And sometimes they will allow you to do that as long as you understand that what goes on in that meeting might be proprietary, especially if they're applying for patents. So, review the publications and the thesis of a current student that's there right now, or a student that just recently graduated. Some folks look at people's publications and they say, well, I saw you did this, back in 2000. That might not be what the lab is working on today in 2000, in the current day. So make sure you see that. So the other thing is, do you understand what problems that lab or that person is working on and how they plan to attack it? So, when we read these papers, sometimes when you're starting out, if you expect to understand even 20% of what you read, you're going to be very frustrated, very frustrated. Your name of the game is for you to start getting familiarity with the terms as well as some of the approaches. So if I'm reading stuff on artificial intelligence, I will see CNN a million times. And that's a convolutional neural network. Well, I don't know what that is. Well, I'm going to learn about that. Or I'm going to see, what a training versus validation is. What's the difference? You're going to see the same things over and over. You're going to see the same benchmarks used all over and over. You're going to see the same measurements used over and over. And that's what you want. You want to become familiar with the biggest pieces, the commonality of the research area that you might be interested in. So that's one way to do that. The next piece is, understanding what somebody else is. Again, I'm assuming that you're going to learn by taking over somebody else's project. What was the initial goal of the research somebody was conducting? And, what did they accomplish and what did they not get done? We all go in thinking we're going to invent, and come up and solve and implement, the full system. And when we're done, we're going to find out that we had to scope the problem down to here. Is it because we're stupid and lazy? No. What happens is, as long as you go along the path, you are going to hit a bunch of bumps. And you notice that in research, the common way to get around those bumps is to make an assumption, right? There's no friction. There's no gravity. The data is all pristine and captured in the same exact way. There's no illumination differences. There's no, capture differences. It's all annotated. Everything's done. And then you find out when you get there to run the experiment, oh, wait, I can't even run this experiment because the data isn't in this format, or the data isn't this, or it wasn't captured this way. And some of those little problems that people sort of push out and make assumptions about sometimes end up being the most impactful research areas, because if it hasn't been done before, people all just sort of expect, that we'll worry about that later. Well, when you go to take what you've done and translate it into industry or to the real world constraints don't fit that. And that's where a lot of research falls short, is they assume too much. They assume that the things that make their problem easier to work on is going to make an impact, and it doesn't make an impact because nobody can use it. because you haven't taken enough real world constraints in there. So think about that. What are some of the real world constraints and barriers that prevent this work from being done? And so when you look at somebody's research, you can see what they did, what they accomplished. And at the beginning of everybody's thesis, the first thing they should be able to say is, here's my contributions, here's what was new and novel, and be able to see what other people did versus what they did and distinguish the differences. So sometimes I see people say it's an extension of the work done by this person. Well, that extension has to be, can't just be incremental, has to be substantial, right? So if I write a book and I say, my name of my book is Nerd Girl, I can't go and say, well, my contribution is I put an S on it called it Nerd Girls, right? You've got to have a real distinguishing feature. So it has to have value. And I think that as you do any research, you're going to see what challenges and new directions fall out of it. And you have to embed yourself into this before you can see it. So you can't come from the outside, say, okay, give me a project and I'm just going to, get in there, dig on it, and I'm going to make results instantly. It doesn't work that way. And if you do that, you're setting yourself up for frustration and failure, because that's not what research is. Research is a bunch of, things we don't know and trying to figure it out. So if I'm going to use somebody else's work, what can I do? Well, I always start my students off. I always have a balance. I always say, I want you doing the scholarly research and I want you to get your hands dirty. So what's that mean? Well, that means I first give them, before I go and say, here, go and implement this new algorithm that you have no idea how well the pieces work, and I want you to modify this. I want you to understand all the pieces that somebody else already did. Now, a lot of times you might have something that's off the shelf, meaning that, you took somebody else's algorithm, there's all these building blocks, and I want you to learn how the system works. I want you to go through the process of understanding all those blocks. So if you physically go and take somebody's paper and can use the MATLAB code or write the Python code and re-implement the algorithm, you learn more about it. You can just try to run it. I find a lot of students will just say, I took somebody else's model, this is what I got out, now I'm going to modify it. Yeah, you can see from the input and the output differences, but there's nothing better than getting your hands dirty and understanding, well, what classification did they use? How did they train it? What did the data look like? How was it annotated? So when you get in there and just try to re-implement something, you already know what the output should be, right? If they did it, their work, and they were honest, you'll know the results. If you can't recreate those results, then maybe you don't know it as well as you do. You should, or maybe something's wrong. And that's where you learn, is to say, well, I re-simulated this. This is what I got. Why did I get that? What did I do wrong? Or what was it different about the implementation? And if you have to physically, if something is, I don't want to say, oh, go rebuild, a device that somebody built, but maybe you can test it, put it on a board, run your own experiments, because everybody's going to have to do some sort of if you have to do a physical prototype. And again, if you're doing lab-based types of things, you sometimes, now in the age of COVID and Zoom, sometimes professors are making their students, before they leave, run videos on what they did and how they did it. So if I'm going to learn how to develop silk tissues and develop a fabricate something, I need to see how somebody else did it. But of course, I need that training first to be in the lab, but then I need to see how they did it. And that's one way to get yourself acclimated to that. Now, when I say getting your hands dirty, that's the physical thing. But if you're just trying to be in the lab and be a lab rat, you're not going to be filling the scholarly stuff that you need to write that thesis. So the other piece of this is making sure that you are also simultaneously doing this balance of research. So when I say always be reading, I don't want you just to read what's in your lab. I want you to be looking at what's new in the world today, what's coming out, what's the greatest thing, coming out. Who else is your the competitor in this field? Who's got the latest stuff that's being cited? What's the latest conference that's out there, and who won best paper? What was it about? And whether it or not it's your topic area, I really want you to engage in trying to look beyond your institution at a plethora of research, whether something you're interested in, plus something that in the labs that you're considering working in. And when I say always be reading, that's why I don't want to say, well, just start by reading everything and go off and spend 2 months reading, you'll go mental. That's why I want the hands-on programming something, working in MATLAB, building something, testing something, and then reading. But reading is not enough. You need to be able to summarize in writing what you learned, because we can read tons of stuff. And in 6 months from now, when you're writing your thesis or writing your prospectus for your thesis, you'll be like, now, where did I see this thing and who was working on that? I know I read it. And you're going to spend more time going mental trying to find out what paper it was and flipping through all this stuff, versus if you had just summarized it and wrote up a little bit about it. And then the other thing is, when you read something, you should keep your reference organized. Every library at institutions teaches EndNote or management types of things. So when you're writing a paper, you don't go put in brackets, citation 1, and oh darn, I had to go insert another paragraph, and now citation 1 becomes citation, and your citations get all screwed up. There's nothing worse than getting a review back from a grant or a publication where it's like, your citations do not match up with where you called it in the paper. If you invest in organizing up front, you will have built your own custom library. You'll be able to share that library, and you will be able to give it keywords like, annotation for biomedical data. And you give it your own, and then you'll get the list. All right, here's all the things that match what you said. It's this paper, and it makes your life so much easier. So that's the first thing I make my students do. So I want you to be able to go to conferences and engage beyond this others and see other student presentations. They're usually posters. They usually poster presentations or short presentations. And now with Zoom conferences, it's easier than ever for you to engage in them, to see what people are doing, seeing how they present. One of the best ways to learn is to watch what other people do. I always say, be the outside, absorb what's great and reject the negative. So what you see somebody do that you admire, try that. And what you say, oh my gosh, the way they presented this was horrible. And they when somebody asked them a question about the math equation, they said, well, that's complicated math. And then they got eaten alive. Well, I don't want to be that person. So learn from that experience so that you can help make yourself stronger and better, and know how to ask questions, be able to see different presentation styles, and see how people frame their research so that a broad audience can understand it. Because when you're starting out, you might not really know much. And you don't want to be intimidated by something and all these formulas. You want to be able to say, I understand the big picture. I understand the contribution. I understand the path plan they had to get there. Go to graduate seminars. We beg our students, we actually give you a grade to come to our graduate seminars, because we want you to have exposure to different things. But this is the best way to engage with other speakers from other institutions who you might someday want to work with. They're from industry, they're from institutions, they could be startup companies. It's a great way for you to see what's going on. And sometimes, like, I just had a young man that I met come give a presentation. He's already got 3 startup companies. And I looked at this and I'm like, oh my God, this is the next, eBay kid. This is someone who's going to be super rich and famous. I want to keep in touch with this person. And I think that that's the type of thing you want to be able to say, hey, you want to build your cohort of people that will be with you for life. And that's something that you want to start thinking about. So let's talk about writing. So what do I want you to write? Do I want you to copy everything? Do I want you to be able to just say, cut and paste from the article? And the answer is no. I think that, I want to know, I would cut and paste who the authors are, the title of the paper, the keywords, and what institutions they come from. And the reason I do that is because as you do this, you'll find out where the work, the concentration, the focus of the work is on. Okay, so I have an anonymous attendee, and I'm going to answer that question 1 second about funding a lab. The abstract, you can cut and paste it, but I suggest you put it in your own words, what they accomplished. Because one of the times when I'm reviewing papers, I see students talk, or especially in student papers, oh, this applies to marketing and social media, and then the abstract, and then in the paper, they don't even talk about that. They just threw it out there to like tease you, and then they don't actually talk about it. What you think of the work. This is for you. So if you say, I had no clue what was going on in here, I don't know why this, I have no clue what this is, I don't understand their approach, that's fine. but at least you can say, but paper's been cited a lot and they do actually have some nice results, and this algorithm. And then, is it useful? Eventually it might not be useful right now, but yeah, this is the latest and greatest thing that's coming out that I want to work in robotics, then I should keep this in mind. And then a flow chart. One of the things I used to sometimes make my students do. So for instance, somebody new in my lab, I'll say, oh, convolutional neural networks. I want you to explain to me how a convolutional neural network works in your own words. And they'll do these beautiful presentations and they'll type out the script. And I'll say, look at me, put the notes away, explain it. And, with one diagram, explain to me what's going on. I don't want to see you reading from the slides. I can do that. And it's not that I don't know what a convolutional neural network is. I'm training my students to be able to walk me through a flow so that they can prove they know an algorithm. And sometimes when they get and say, well, it takes an input and then it, goes into this box and it comes out and it tells you the answer, that's telling me you really don't know what's going on in the flow. You really didn't dig down deep. So that's one thing. And I suggest that you do this for all your papers. And when you're writing your thesis, you will be able to compare and contrast your method to other things, or use it as a benchmark against your own work, or be able to say, here's what they did. Here's where, oh, wait, they didn't think about this scenario. They even said it was a limitation. I can overcome that limitation. So we have a question. It says, what if the lab has no funding and I'm asked to design a new branch in my lab no one in my lab has ever done? A new assistant professor's lab. Oh, that's a primo position. So that's a great question, because your professor is trying to start a new branch. They're vested in trying to get the best research. So the first thing I would suggest is looking at who's in this field doing this topic, and what is the expertise, like what's the goal? Is the goal just to figure out what funding is out there? So if I look at funding, sometimes we say, well, this is a really well plowed field. So I'll give you an example. If you do anything in compression, image compression, right? Let's take that for an instance. Image compression, or coming up with a new noise filter. That's been something that's been done for 50, 60 years. So for you to make a new contribution by coming up with a new compression algorithm, boy, you have to walk on water, because it's been really well plowed, that everybody's been working in that field. But if you think about artificial intelligence or some new emerging technology, it's a lot easier to make a new contribution if nobody's ever done anything with it. So the first thing I suggest is you look at the discipline and you say, well, what are the major research areas being funded in the topic area that you're being asked to design? Who are the biggest players in this area? What are they focusing on? And how can you either use their foundation to leap off of? So everybody wants to start from scratch. No. Research is meant for other people to jump off of. So I'll give you an example. One of my favorite algorithms is the GANS, the GANS algorithm that's used in neural networks and artificial intelligence. And so we use that algorithm for our learning as one of our models, and then we can make improvements on it, or we can use it in different ways. I don't want to go say, well, you know what, darn, they've got this great algorithm, I want to beat that. Well, you can make extensions, novel extensions to it. You can couple it with novelties and other things that people haven't thought about. So start with what's being funded out there in this area, who are the biggest players, and what types of things and challenges are they struggling with. If you see a whole bunch of papers on the same thing, trying to make improvement, you know that they haven't solved it yet. And you try to say, well, what's some of the barriers? So I would start there. Second question is, how do you keep, so look at funding too. Look at the fundings that's out there. So if it's something that's really tiny and not a really novel field, you look at the National Science Foundation, look at the National Institute of Health, look at the funding things that are getting out. Get yourself on one of those distribution lists. So sign up for one of these distribution lists so that you can see what's coming out for grant solicitations, and you'll see the topics, and you might not be able to apply to them, but at least you'll see where the money's going. And that's what your new assistant professor is going to want. How do you keep your mind focused to find the best papers and not get swamped in all the great papers in the field? Well, this is why if you look at them and you look at what's out there, you will quickly start recognizing, honestly, if you look at 10 different papers, you'll recognize what's a really good paper and what's like, oh, why am I reading this? and that's why I say sometimes, if I read one paper and they cite another paper, I usually find that link, that trail, somebody's already done that work for me. So I can look and say, well, this person referenced this person and that person referenced this person, and that history, that ancestry is pretty thick. It's a pretty thick histogram that everybody who writes about this cites this paper. So it'll help you, utilize the work that other people have already done, finding this research for you. But I always tell people, start from today, 5 years back to find the latest and greatest. Because if you start, some people will, I co-invented digital twins. Is somebody going to cite my paper back from 1980, whatever, or 1990 something? They might, but if I'm looking at this, I'm going to say, well, I don't want to know what, this might have been the person we're giving her a citation because she wrote and did this, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But that's not the research today, because it's evolved, right? People say, well, this person came up with this first algorithm, but look how it's evolved. So I always say, start with today and 5 years back, because the older it gets, the more chances are that you're going to miss something. So re-summarizing, look at the papers that you're reading, who are they citing, and keep the 5 years back, look at the current stuff that's coming out every day. I had a database. One of the things that my group does is we create databases, annotated databases of information to help other researchers doing artificial intelligence. And one of them published not even 2 weeks ago. And the next day after it published, people were asking me questions about it. And I was like, whoa, that's a good researcher, because they're patrolling to see what's coming out every day. They're not saying, well, because when you submit something, you don't want another worst thing is review and saying, well, you don't even know what's out there. Your stuff is old. You didn't even see that this came out. And you might be like, but it just came out this year. They're expecting you to be on top of it, and you can be. Okay, hope that answers your question. So I also want to give you some tangible things to do. And what I sometimes talk about is SMART goals. And SMART is an acronym. I want you to pick 3 SMART goals for yourself. And they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and are time frame anchored, which means that you're giving yourself a deadline. And I think that that's really important, because I can say, well, you know what? I want to become a medical doctor. I want to become a medical doctor and now go into medicine, switch my field. Well, that's really specific. I can measure it, but is it really attainable for me, where I have zero background in medical, and is it relevant to what I want to do? And again, what's the time frame? I probably need another 25 years to get there. So you don't want to, anchor yourself down with things that aren't realistic. So I have some examples for you about this. So specific, I want to learn Python. Measurable, I want to be able to understand the code in my lab, either in MATLAB or Python, that people are using. And I want to be able to not only just understand how they wrote it, I want to be able to write my own. Attainable, okay, well, if I've never programmed before, is this going to be attainable in your time frame? And am I taking 5 other classes at the same time? So you might say, well, you know what, I can't take a course, a 13-week or 16-week course, but I could do it online through an online provider, or I could take samples in my lab and recode it or run these things and then modify it and understand the constructs. So making sure that you can make sure it's attainable. And then, okay, well, I'm going to sign up for this, short workshop that happens 2 hours every week for 3 weeks. Well, if you're signing up as an action, but you need to show up. So you need a commitment, and sometimes I say, if it's an online class, get your friends to do it with you. Get someone to partner with you. So maybe there's other new students or new people in your lab that want to attain the same goal as you. And if that's the case, let them join you. So be specific about what you want to do. I want to learn EndNote. and I know that the library is going to give a 1-hour seminar on how to do this. I'm going to go take that seminar, and that's attainable, and it is relevant to my research because I'm going to be using this tool for all my research. I have it time, and what's it measurable? Well, when I'm done, I want to create my own library with 10 papers that I've just read and summarized. Okay, very specific. And if you write it down, I always have a saying that if you don't write it down, it's a wish. So write it down, put it on your to-do list, and use the SMART goals. Try to analyze it. And one of the things I get nervous about is students like think that they can do everything. I'm going to take 5 classes, and I'm going to do research, and I'm going to go part-time, go get a part-time job, or I'm going home on the weekend, and I'm going on spring break, and I'm going to be able to go to all these parties and do this. You're going to break. You're going to absolutely break. So, we all have big goals in mind. And I just want you to break it down to something small and attainable. Because if you do it in bite-sized chunks, you're more likely to build your confidence that you'll do it versus me setting up that, I'm going to have my master's degree and I'm going to take these 5 courses this semester instead of distributing it over whatever. And then I'll do my research and then I'll worry about it. No. You've got to integrate it and be smart about your SMART goals. The other thing in finding a research topic is you really have to like it, especially if you're doing a PhD. Well, I remember when I came from industry and I approached a potential advisor, and again, my real advisor that I selected ended up being an assistant professor because I find they're more open because they're trying to get new ideas and fresh people into their lab to do things. But I first approached a very well-seasoned professor, and again, some of them come in and some students might like this, like, oh, he said, you're going to do this, this, and this is what I want you to work on. And I was like, ugh. And I was self-funded from industry. So that's another thing is like, well, yes, I really had this project idea that I wanted to pitch. And that's, he yelled at me. He's like, what do you think research is? And I said, well, if I'm going to spend 5 years on it, don't you think I should like the topic area? So you want to make sure that, this is a relationship that you're going to have to build. PhDs do not come out in a year. The average is 4 or 5 years. Depending on some of those biological sciences or biomedical stuff, they don't let you out till the experiment runs, and then you can't get live tissue to cooperate. You could be there for 7 years. If you don't like what you're researching, you are going to be miserable. So be careful, because some students just go for the funding and then they get into it, and it's hard to motivate yourself. So if you have the opportunity to choose your research, think about what it is that fascinates you about, and what's the potential impact if you are successful in this area. Are you going to save 1 million lives? Are you going to have a new commercial product that will influence or make efficiencies or save energy? What is the big impact? What will make you proud about that research? That's one of the things you want to think about. Students laugh when I ask this question. But when I meet with you, I will say, what's the dream? What's your dream? And they look at me like, what is she, I'm asking you, what is it, your life ambition? Why are you even getting a graduate degree? It was just to be called doctor or, whatever, or just because, you're trying to find something new and you don't know what to do with your life. That's really not the right reason. What you need to be thinking about is, what are you going to do with this degree? A lot of people want to get a PhD, and I say, are you going into research or teaching? And they're like, no. Are you starting your own company? No, I just thought it'd be cool, whatever. Like, no, that's 5 to 7 years of your life that you don't need to be, to be doing that. But if your dream says, you know what, I need these credentials because it's going to give me the skills and competencies to be able to move into these fields, that's a great reason for it. So what's your dream? If you want to be an entrepreneur, then the master's might be fine. If you want to do research or something else, do you want to own your own company? Do you want to work for a big company before you leave and you need to know all these skills and know how to handle these things? You've got to ask yourself that question. Where do you want to be? A lot of people might not know. I did not know. And then we'll talk about that. I said, here's 2 kinds of students, wind and fire. And I made this up. I totally made this up. but so if you quote it, it's me. But I made it up because to me, when I first started out as a student, I said, well, I'll be a computer engineer. And I let the wind sort of blow me, right, wherever it went. Well, computer engineers go design computers. Well, I went to work for a computer company because that's where the wind blew me. And that's what you do with a computer engineering degree. And then other people are fire that I used to be jealous of. I'm like, how come they know exactly what they want out of life? My friends know this. They know they want to go do this. They want to start a company. They want to be in this field. And I was like, why can't I be that person? I couldn't be that person because I didn't have enough exposure to what was out there. So when I went to work in industry, all of a sudden I was like, you know what? I see these problems everywhere. I got interested. I worked at IEEE and I got to see the impact of technology and learn such a broader view of technology that I became fire. I was like, why am I letting the wind blow me wherever it blows me just because I have, I'm a computer engineer, I build computers. I don't want to build computers. I love robots. I love animation. I love visualization. What can I do with all this? And the fire gets lit. So you might start out letting the flow, ebb and flow, and your researcher, your advisor might give you a problem because you don't know where to start, but it exposes you. But it's up to you to take the reins and say, well, I want to look beyond this? And I really stress that, if you get involved outside your institution in IEEE, that are one of your professional societies, you will get that. And then when the fire is lit, I'm still not done today. And sometimes I ask, why can't I put out this fire, this burning ambition in me? It's killing me because I'm never satisfied. I want to keep go. And I want to keep doing different things. I want to expand. You will learn to embrace that. And that's where innovation comes in. Okay. So now what happens if you have an idea? You have a new idea. And the first question I'm going to ask you is it really a new idea? Because if you haven't done that literature search and, from current today and back, you really might not really be new. And you have to be very careful because sometimes people think application versus contribution. So I might say, I want to come up with a new weight tracking app, with a better user interface. Well, that might be a nice master's project, but if you don't have some new novel underlying foundational algorithm that differentiates you, you're not making a scholarly contribution. And that's what defending a thesis is all about, is what is that novel contribution that you're making to the discipline that no one's ever done. So be careful about applications versus theoretical scholarly contributions. And if, now the thing is, I have an idea, does it fit into my funding area, the funding area? So again, to the person that asked about starting up a new branch in the lab, is this something that would fit into that funding area or that can be expanded or be a new thing to bring into there, that new novelty that no one's ever done before? Is it in my advisor's field of interest? And are they open to different things? I always caution people who are being funded, don't go off and start talking to other faculty members about research and investigating research. You have your weekly tasks or in milestones that you need to meet with your advisor. You've got to stay and make sure your advisor's looped in. You don't want to just go off and say, oh, by the way, I went off to, this other institution, I, helped do this prototype for them. You'll get your head chopped off immediately. So keeping your advisor in the loop every week or when you meet with them, saying, you know what, I did this research on these 5 papers. Don't give them the links. Again, be able to talk it through, give them a flow chart, give them a visual, talk about what you found. And I think that, by the way, there's a huge solicitation coming up, with a $20 million, blah, blah, blah. The deadlines are coming up. We might be able to be in this area and see what happens. And then who is the closest to doing what you're thinking about out there? Again, who's the king of the area? What are they doing that's so novel? And what is it that they're struggling with that you could see yourself providing a differential? If you come from industry, a lot of you might have had worked in industry and you might have a great idea and say, why hasn't anybody done this before? Again, if you do the deep dive and you see no one's ever done it before, you might say, well, no one did before because no one could figure out this problem. Maybe that's the problem I should be focusing on so that everybody can now make that leap. And that's how you pitch your idea to your advisor or to a company. So if you want to be sponsored by a company, sometimes companies come into universities and they have problems. when you go to these graduate seminars and you see a research lab and say, well, we're working on, crowd dynamics and analyzing crowd dynamics. You might come and approach that company and say, well, you know what? You mentioned that you had this problem from my research. Would you be interested in this? And then now all of a sudden you've got a corporate sponsor, your advisor loves you. We love it when our people bring us new things. So that's a great thing. And another way to do it is for you to be able to go out, and I've been telling students, if you go to graduate seminars, go give a talk on what you've done or what your interests are. So a lot of them are even to undergraduate class, or even during open house days where they're recruiting new students. Even if you're a new student, undergraduates, want to hear what you're working on or how you got where you are. Do a talk to people. You get great ideas. So again, I want to really emphasize that if you're doing an MS or PhD thesis versus a master's project, there's different requirements. If you need a thesis, you need new contributions, which means something no one's ever done, which means you might get a patent out of it. The other thing I would suggest is maybe one of your SMART goals is that you make an appointment and learn how to file patents or learn about patents and what would make a patent, or if there's even IP, intellectual property, which is a great idea. Every university's professors like myself have intellectual property, but we don't have the bandwidth to go off and develop it. So I might have some theoretical intellectual property. You go to institution and say, what's in the portfolio for Professor Panetta? I'd like to, she does all this image processing. I'd like to see what's in her portfolio, and maybe I want to go and do something in research on that. Another great way for you to either start a new business or jump into our field and say, well, Professor Panetta, you did this with the electrolarynx, but you didn't use any artificial intelligence. I'd like to now incorporate that with that. Would that be a good thesis? I'd be like, come on aboard. So make sure that when I give my students their thesis, the first thing they want to do is an abstract. Say, forget the abstract, give me 1 page of all your novel contributions that you've contributed. And they'll say, well, I built this application that does this sort of app counting and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I don't want to know the application. I want to know the theoretical scholarly contribution. Applications are afterwards, because a thesis defense, you got to be careful, because you use the word application, they think you're vocational. You got to do the theoretical contribution that you might have plugged it in to demonstrate or prototype it in something, but you need to show the formulation and grounding and show that nobody else did it and why it's an improvement upon current state of the art. Get your pitch deck ready. Do not just go and say, oh, here's a bunch of links to my advisor. If a link comes in for professor, somebody comes in and says, well, here's a bunch of papers I read, we should do this. And I'll be like, no. But if you come in and show me, I've researched this, here's how they did theirs, here's what you've done, here's the benchmarks, I've even run a few simulations, I make a conclusion, I think this is where we should make our pitch. So I think this is appropriate for our person that asked that question. Make some pitches, look and say, and again, make sure you just don't go off on a tangent if your advisor's giving you some research and do what you want versus what they're asking you to do. There's a balance there, right? I'm assuming that you've given some leeway to go investigate, or you're a new student roaming around looking for a thing, a project. If you're in industry, or you can connect us to industry, we love it, because company relationships, I did digital simulation of computer architectures for so long, but when I left the computer company, trying to get proprietary designs was like, no way, I didn't have that access anymore. But if you can strike up a relationship with another company, you sign a non-disclosure agreement, and they let you actually have access to things and get data that you might otherwise not have access to. So that's a great relationship. And we love building relationships with corporations, because you will get an in for a job, an internship, other mentorships, people who might be on your committee. You should always be thinking about who's going to be on your committee, because you always need an outside person. So this helps. It's a win-win all around. So those are just some overviews of things that you can do. I've tried to make this quick and painless. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain those at this time. Any questions? None? Okay. Well, at this time, I will stop the recording.